Top 10 Ponzi scheme scandals in history. Hello guys and welcome back. First of all, what is the Ponzi scheme? A Ponzi scheme is a special kind of fraudulent investing scam that promises unbelievably high rates of return with the assurance and promise of very little to no risk for the investors. Companies that engage themselves in the Ponzi scheme will now focus all of their energy and workforce on attracting new clients to make investments within this scheme. This new income that comes from investments is then used to pay the returns to the original investor by marking it as a profit earned from a legitimate transaction. Ponzi schemes rely entirely on a constant flow of income from new investments so as to continue to be able to provide returns to older investors. When this flow of income runs out, the scheme falls apart completely, thus causing major losses to all the investors. In simpler words, a Ponzi scheme is a kind of fraud that is based on a fake investment offer that one schemer or a group of schemers gets other people to invest money in it. Now, let's try to dive into how the Ponzi scheme came into being. The term Ponzi scheme is coined after a swindler and fraudster termed Charles Ponzi in 1919. However, the first documented instances of such an investment fraud can be found in the mid to late 1800s when Sarah Howe in the US and Adele Spitzer in Germany orchestrated them. In fact, these methods that were followed to execute what later came to be known as the Ponzi scheme feature as a detailed description in two separate novels written by Martin Chuzzlewit, Charles Dickens, published in 1844, and Little Dorrit in 1857. Charles Ponzi's original scheme first happened in 1919 and was primarily focused on the U.S. Postal Service. At that time, the Postal Service had developed the concept of international reply coupons, which allowed the sender to pre-purchase postage while including it in their correspondence. The receiver would then take this coupon to a local post office in order to exchange it for the priority airmail postage stamps that were needed to send in a reply. This type of exchange was known as an arbitrage, which was not considered to be an illegal practice. However, this was when Ponzi became greedy and decided to expand his efforts. Under the name of his company, Securities Exchange Company, Ponzi had promised returns of about 50% within a time frame of 45 days or 100% within 90 days. Owing to his success in the postage stamp scheme, several investors were immediately attracted to his new offer. Instead of actually investing the money, Ponzi simply redistributed it and termed it as the profit made by the investors. The scheme could last until the August of 1920, when the Boston Post began investigating the Securities Exchange Company. The possibility of such a thing happening might sound a little surprising now, wouldn't it? But Ponzi wasn't the sole player who managed to execute his scheme for a certain period of time. History has witnessed several scams under this scheme, and the top 10 most surprising ones are mentioned below. Number 10. American Social Security System. We begin our list with American Social Security System. A lot of people believe that the American Social Security System is the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time. As a joke, of course. While this is not true, Social Security certainly radiates the vibe of a Ponzi scheme. There is one group of investors who pay into an investment which is then used to pay back to the earlier group of investors. There is also a belief about how Social Security will run out one day because there are too many millennials who are now a part of the system and will end up depleting the trust fund down to a situation where there would be no money left for any of the future generations to be able to receive any benefit. However, the key difference here is that in a Ponzi scheme, the actual investment is a giant fraud in itself. Investors might believe that they are investing in, say, something like real estate, when in reality the money is actually going out to something completely different. That is, early investors or funding the schemer's private jet. Number 9. Bernie Madoff. Bernie Madoff is believed to be the most famous of all the Ponzi schemers, while also possibly surpassing Charles Ponzi himself. He was the mastermind behind the largest fraud seen in the history of the US while stealing an amount of $65 billion from his investors. Madoff lived a life of luxury and was counted amongst the list of many famous and wealthy people. While his wealth management company started off as a legitimate business, Madoff's greed grew over time, and he turned the entire business into the vehicle which ran his Ponzi scheme. Madoff's son Mark also worked with him, but had also claimed not to know anything about the fraud when questioned. Madoff was sentenced to serve 150 years in prison. This is the maximum possible sentence for his crimes. Number 8. Reed Slatkin. Reed Slatkin was the co-founder of Earthlink. Starting in 1986, he ran a 15-year-long Ponzi scheme through an investment club that assured of a return value of about 24%. He managed to scam nearly 800 people and got an amount of almost $592 million. Slatkin was also a Scientology minister, and most of his victims were Scientologists, along with film producer Arian Bernstein and news anchor Greta Van Susteren. Number 7. Tom Petters. Tom Petters managed to scam his investors with an amount of $3.65 billion by convincing them to fund non-existent electronic goods under the pretense of selling them to big box retailers who weren't actually buying them. Petters was a successful and renowned businessman who also owned a number of well-known companies, including Polaroid and Fingerhut. His business interests were the biggest benefit since they presented him as a trustworthy individual to his investors. Number 6. Adrian Niewoot. In 1984, Adrian Niewoot, a South African entrepreneur, decided to market a beauty product based on an ingredient called kubus. He sold the activator kits to all the investors. These kits consisted of a dried plant that would allow the investors to grow the ingredient themselves in a kind of work-at-home scam. The investors would then sell these grown cultures back to the company so that they can be used as an ingredient in the beauty product. Oh, by the way, we forgot to mention a small fact. This beauty product did not exist. Irrespective of how many activator kits were sold, Niewoot would never receive more than one kit in any given week. Number 5. Gary Gauthier. Gary Gauthier hosted a radio show called It's God's Money and stole $6 million from 38 senior citizens living in Pinellas, Pasco, and Hillsborough counties. He lured in the people by asking his listeners to call him and would then set up a meeting with them while promising an 8% to 40% return on real estate investments made by them. He ran the Ponzi scheme from 2005 to 2010. In order to lure more investors, he would also welcome his current investors to call into his radio show and talk about how they succeeded in getting rich quickly. Number 4. Scott Rothstein. Scott Rothstein holds the credit for orchestrating the biggest Ponzi scheme ever witnessed in the state of Florida and is currently serving a 50-year sentence for bilking investors out of a total monetary value of $1.4 billion. He was a former lawyer and was known for his incredibly luxurious lifestyle. He owned Bugatti and several other expensive cars, over 200 luxury watches, and also had golden toilets installed in his home. Rothstein had guaranteed his investors a return of a minimum of 20% in the first 3 months of the purchase of fabricated structured settlements. Number 3. Gerald Payne. Gerald Payne was the pastor of Greater Ministries International and was supposed to be a man of God. He used religious scriptures to convince the followers to invest their money with him and his church and made them believe that they could double their investment. He succeeded in convincing 18,000 people to invest about $20 million. Number 2. Michael Eugene Kelly. Michael Eugene Kelly has rightfully earned his spot on this position by defrauding around 8,000 mostly retired or elderly people out of an amount valuating to $500 million. While most of the Ponzi schemes leave very little or nothing left to return to the victims, Kelly had millions of dollars worth of real estate and other assets. His scam involved creating universal leases, which paid high commissions for selling timeshare investments, and for all those who invested, there were 2 options. They could choose between staying in the hotel rooms for a period of up to 1 week every year or transfer that period to another company, which was also owned by Kelly and offered an annual return of 11% to the investors. Almost every investor involved in this scam went ahead with the second option. Number 1. Perlman Scandal. The first one is undoubtedly the Perlman scandal. Perlman was considered to be one of the biggest and most successful music producers back in the 1990s. He was renowned for putting together and working with well-known bands, including the Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, and LFO. But introducing the world to the most popular boy bands of the 1990s wasn't where Perlman's job ended. He was also the designer and mastermind behind one of the longest-running Ponzi schemes seen in the history of the United States. For over 20 years, Perlman managed to convince his investors to invest their money into two companies that only existed on paper. He had also created fake financial statements for obtaining bank loans. Overall, Perlman, who had successfully made millions of dollars as a music producer, had now also stolen more than $300 million from all of his investors. Now, wasn't that an informative yet interesting topic? While you check out some facts related to the Ponzi scheme, we will go ahead and curate some more fun and informative topics to discuss with you. Also, do not forget to hit the like button and do share and subscribe to our YouTube channel for further videos. Until next time, hasta la vista, guys!